the fact, as usual, always are the best response. The question is how you spin facts and who want to spin the facts. I'm sure if I say today, as is written in any statistic, the EU-Serbia export trade is 24 billion euro, 24 billion euro a year, while the Russia is 1.7 billion euro, it means it's 1/10. Nobody will say in the press tomorrow. So I think we have to reflect also how the news that exist are portrayed. I cannot buy. I'm as a professionally optimist, but I think stating the fact is always important. I think the business community can help us. You know where the numbers are. Make the numbers known. You know who is the largest donor. You know who is the largest investor. We will keep in saying, and certainly as Thomas has said, that the government has certainly a responsibility in pass the right message. Otherwise, sometimes I think if I were in mainstream Serbian, I would be confused and disorientated on where we're going. Even though when we run our own polls, we see that on average 55+% of the Serbian, if asked to, are you voting the referendum tomorrow? Will you be voting in favor of the EU? They will say yes, 55. But certainly looking at some press and newspaper, since Serbia is in another world. So I think we need, on that sense, certainly we can do better, explain better, but certainly media and institution and government in particular can help out. And the business can be more vocal on this as well. Last point with my NGO's colleague when he said filling the gap on infrastructure. We're filling the gap, but the EU is filling the gap on many, many issues. Who is doing environment in this country? Who is doing rule of law? Who is doing health, consumer protection? Have you seen other donor who did this? I don't think so. So in that sense, we have a very, I wouldn't say ambition, it's objectively ambitious because we have to work throughout the 35 chapters. We cannot say we just do road. Well, we do road. I cannot do something, I do a bridge. We do bridges, we do hospital, we do judges, we do prosecutor, we do prison, we do the Erasmus, we do a lot of things. Of course, if if somebody help us to pass the message, our life would be easier. Thank you.
No, yeah, right. I know all this. I know all this, and that's in fact, if I were in your place, I'd be pretty frustrated by this perception. Thank you, frankly. So I sympathize. But on the other hand, somehow a lot of this goes unnoticed for some reason, and I don't want to dwell on the reasons of that. Ambassador Falconi, the election of Macron, I think, has raised a lot of hopes with a lot of people in Europe, and they saw him somehow as a new face of Europe, a new leader that will, with the help of the other countries of Europe, find a way to reform. And then, of course, as you know, basically, Europe is so much affected by history and the French history, from the Revolution to Napoleon, etc., etc. You can say in a way it created Europe in a way, or an idea. So, how do you see some of these problems? And like I told you, there was a lot of, among other things, criticism on how this regional issues are being met. Do you have any? Are there any fresh ideas on how things could work out here, aside of what is already being done, perhaps?
Well, you asked a lot of different questions, but I mean, let me say that from my European experience, I think you have to put the things into order, and starts by the beginning, which is that, EU, the European Union. You asked, is there a will for the European Union, the people in France, to have the Balkans in EU? But I think the first question is to ask, do the people in France support the EU itself for the French? Which is the first question, before even tackling to look at the outside. And the first answer is no. So once you say that, if you don't solve that question, you can stop everything. So, I mean, I'm sorry to put the things in order. So Macron's reflection is to notice that even in France, who's been a country founder of the EU, there is a kind of despair about the EU itself for the French citizens themselves. So this is the reason why Macron's goal is to try to rebuild something in, I don't know, fostering, perhaps there is no reason to hope for the European citizens. So Macron's hope is to work internally in the EU, to try to build more social Europe, to try to build more sustainable development Europe, to try to build more the idea that they will have a Europe who will protect themselves, who will promote the interest to the outside, and so on and so forth. So this is why we say, and Macron said it himself, that you, I mean, have to work on the rebuilding hope for the EU citizens, at least for the French ones, themselves. So you have to work more on a political Europe. It doesn't mean that it's going to be in 20 years. It has to be now, because if it's not, it's going to be too late. Do this, the only thing I want to say, which is, I think, traditionally a wrong idea, do this lack of hope in EU is the result of the enlargement, the one that has taken place already. No. It's just that the people in EU lost hope. I mean, perhaps I'm going too far, but in France, lost some of the hope that they had in the EU integration model. So it's not because of the enlargement. So it has nothing to do. So it's not the fault of Poland or whatever. It's the fault of politicians bringing EU as a model to project themselves in. So it's not the fault of the existing enlargement, and I don't think the future enlargement would be another problem. So this is why Macron says that we have to work in parallel, first with the countries to the accessions, and then also to rebuild EU that will give more hope to the EU citizens. The promise for the Balkans, I mean, I think France has, it was, I mean, the promise for EU integration was promised for the Balkans first time in Zagreb in 2000, which was a summit under the French presidency of the EU. So there is some strong commitment. Then as far as what should the countries of the region do, I mean, no, it's not that, I mean, I wouldn't give any advice, but my feeling is that, I mean, war has not been, I mean, it's unfortunately not so long ago that this region experienced war, and I think the effort of building some regional integration or pacification or brothership among the countries of the region would be a reassuring element for the EU citizens and country to welcome the region. Because if you believe that you don't care about the neighbor, but you care about who will welcome you, I mean, it's not very comforting for the ones who welcomes you. So, and the only thing I see from the EU, existing EU itself, is at least that it's built on the relation of a complete normalization of all the neighbors, I mean, geographically, of the EU countries, existing EU countries. I mean, so I think a strong incentive for the region should be to say, not only this regional cooperation would be good economically, and when you have good economic result, you feel better, and so that's one aspect, but it will also give some political reassurance for the ones who will welcome you, that you are welcoming a pacified group rather than a part of a family which will fight against each other all the time, whereas you will have to put them on one side of the Christmas table, to speak from the French point of view. I mean, so this is the point. So I think the effort to work towards normalization, brotherly relations from the countries of the regions among themselves would be good for the countries themselves, economically, politically, and also would be good for their European integration. The last point I wanted to say is also a bit of advertising, but it's right that we live in a world of uncertainty. And what my country is, and what does it mean? It means that you have sovereign states. So you could build, I mean, they can decide what they want. The only thing my country is trying to do is not to prevent that, of course, but to try to put this in such frameworks, which is multilateralism, meaning EU, UN, OSCE, that at least you can avoid, or you can try to avoid, because there are frameworks with rule of law and so on, some kind of too big surprises or too big unilateralism and so on. So we are working towards avoiding uncertainties as much as possible.
Ambassador, I think it's a well-taken point, and I remember saying myself a long time ago, look, if we're going, and this is natural, if we're going to be part of a larger European neighborhood, the first we have to prove is that we're good neighbors with each other. This is obvious. But instead of that, what we're having here right now, and I think this is made even worse than it was 10 or 15 years ago, is the abuse of the sentiments of the past, and this happens all the time. And I'm reminded, you know, of Lyndon Johnson, who was a Southern politician and Democrat, and he signed the Civil Rights Act, and he killed the Democratic Party in the South consciously. And he said at one point, every time there's an election, all I hear is Negro, Negro, Negro. I'm sick and tired of it. Okay. Every time there's an election, you hear Bosnian, Muslims, Croat, Serb, Albanian, Montenegrin, this and that. And this is somehow a way that is an easy street for politicians to rile up some of these older sentiments. And this is not a positive step in the direction that you were discussing a minute ago. This is exactly the opposite of it. And we're seeing this a lot of the time here, and it seems to be repeating itself. Mr. Savkovic.
Yes, only a couple of points, because you were asking a question on backsliding, and also to comment on. We didn't talk about last elections for the European Parliament, and I find them very interesting because you had a great turnout, and now we seem to be heading towards a more prominent, or at least an attempt of a more prominent role for a different European Parliament, in a way that the composition of the Parliament will be different. And again, referring to backsliding, I mean, yes, there are modern populists are winning, but also are the others. I mean, it's still an open contest, and you could say that this battle for the heart of Europe and this idea of Europe is going to continue. Also, wanting to say a few words on the visibility. One of the most successful events organized by the EU this year was actually the election night, because it made us, at least those of us who were present, it made us feel, I would say, very European by a very simple way, because we were allowed to vote. Sorry, we were given an opportunity to vote, actually, and surprise, surprise, it was the Liberals and the Greens who won in Belgrade at that very election. So what I'm saying is that, and also referring to this gap, absolutely, this is true, and the reason why the message is not being transmitted is, of course, I have to say, our government. In the area of consumer protection, in the area of protection of environment, improving health services, and so on and so forth, all these things that affect quality of life, I mean, there's no discussion, at least for me, of where the blame is. And also one last thing, when Ambassador Schieb said that we sometimes are too focused on internal issues within the EU. Well, I think that is a kind of a proof that we are very interested because we want to get in. And in a way, when you look at political parties and their groupings here, they are also becoming more and more interested. Look at how some of the right-wing parties in this country are trying to get involved with AFD, how they're trying to build bridges. So there is, I would say, at least for those parties, they see a European future. Thank you.
Okay. I've been provocateur long enough here. I've given a hard time to the ambassadors here and our panelists in Marko. So anybody who wants to raise a question, we have some time. I would like to give this to the audience. If not, we'll move on and give each or any one of you that wants to make a short comment before we break for the next session. So any questions? Questions, not comments, questions. Okay, if there are not any questions, one of you want to make any kind of short comment on whatever issue you think is important?
To comment, one on regionalism, another one on the weight of history. Before we discuss Belgian process and so on and so forth, so my take is that what we are trying to push is for an building block. I mean, the more the region is integrated, is easier it will be. And I make an example. Otherwise, it looks like that we are talking about the sky. Digital. Basically, the European Union, after a number of years where we struggled with our telecommunication company, launched the Roam like it a home process. So basically, when you travel in the EU, you don't pay roaming charges between France and Germany or Italy and Austria. It's played like a home. And we launched this project in the Western Balkans. And basically, the response has been positive. It was so positive that the not from the telecommunication, from the government, to be immediately linked to the Roam like it home in Europe. We said, no, let's do in two steps. We do first you link each other, and after you will link to the EU. So in April, the Digital Summit was about signing a treaty among the region to have the Roam like it home between 2019 and 2021. Those of you who have been traveling, and I've been traveling with the Serbian mobile in the region, you see that your cost of roaming are decreasing. By 21, they should be the same. And from 21, we will link to the EU. What it's about is not SEFTA plus, SEFTA minus, multiplication, square roots. It's a simple process of building the region, a system that take together, and then you move to link to the region afterward. This is what I see regional, and I'm not a big fan of new format. The second point is history is a weight. Of course, we have a heavy baggage in Europe, but I don't know if it's for a case, probably for coincidence. Here on this stage, you have an Italian and Austrian who made the war on Tirolo or Alto Adige for a century, and they fixed the border. And here you have a French and a German who fought on the Rhine for a number of years. At the end, we put this agreement in the agreement means that we settle the issues. And basically, the European Union is also resilient because the agreement stuck. It was a real, you go through a painful exercise in which you know what the problems are, and you made an agreement.